Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. So quickly, I just want to address the sound issue in the last video. It seemed like my video was not recording in stereo, so if you were wearing headphones, you would only hear it in one ear, and hopefully I've resolved the issue with this video, but if not, I will try to, I promise. Unfortunately, I'm not super technologically savvy. So if there's any of you guys out there that are like super savvy with sound or AV equipment, and this video is still not fixed and still not recording in stereo, go ahead and give me some options if you have them. All right, let's get right into Mystery Monday. So today we're talking about the alphabet murders, also known as the twin initial murders. The 1970s in Rochester, New York was fairly quiet. Rochester is a city in upstate New York. It's known for its really snowy weather because it's right on the border of Canada. And also it's the birthplace of amateur photography because that's where Eastman Kodak is still housed. The city itself is surrounded by multiple suburbs where many people lived, worked, and felt safe. That all changed in the fall of 1971 when a young girl was found raped and murdered and tossed on the side of the road. Shortly after this discovery, 2 more girls would be found in the same way. All 3 victims had similarities. None of the 3 girls lived with both parents. All 3 girls were Roman Catholic, and all 3 had some sort of learning or developmental difficulties. They all disappeared in late afternoon, and they were all presumed to be taken by car. The most startling similarity of all, though, is that all the girls had twin initials, meaning the first letter of their first name and the first letter of their last name were the same. What is even stranger is when their bodies were dumped, they were found in suburbs of Rochester, New York that started with the same letter as their names. The first victim was 10-year-old Carmen Cologne. Carmen was a really pretty young girl. She had dark hair and dark eyes. She was quick to smile. She was friendly. She was well known in her neighborhood. It's called the Bull's Head area of downtown Rochester, and a lot of her family lived there, her extended family, so she was well known around the area. Carmen was born in Rochester, but she spent the first half of her life in Puerto Rico. When her parents decided to move back to New York, she struggled a little bit in school and she was put into special education classes because she grew up learning Spanish. Her family spoke Spanish at home and she struggled a little bit with the English language when she was thrown into school. Carmen's mother was only 17 years old when she had her, and shortly after Carmen's birth, her father just took off and abandoned them. So it's not a huge stretch to say that Carmen's life at home wasn't picture perfect. She was one of 6 siblings that her mother had, so there wasn't a lot of attention for her. There wasn't a lot of time for her. When you have 6 kids, it's hard to give them all a lot of your time and attention. She would end up floating between her mother's house, where her father's brother, Miguel, had ended up moving in, living with her mother almost as like a Commonwealth husband, and she ended up floating between that home and her grandparents' home, which was about a 10-minute walk away. By the fall of 1971, in the time of her disappearance, Carmen was living full-time with her grandparents. She had her own little room in their house, and it was full of like religious relics, crucifixes and pictures of the Virgin Mary, etc. Carmen also struggled with night terrors for her entire life. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night in such sheer terror, people didn't know what to do. Her bad dreams eventually became such a nightly occurrence that even her grandparents, they just couldn't keep getting up every night and making the trip down the hall to her room to comfort her. So she was left alone in this icy world of horrifying terror that she couldn't escape at night. On November 16th, 1971, Carmen walked to her local pharmacy, Jack's Drugs. She was picking up a prescription for her grandfather. When the pharmacist told her it was going to take about 30 minutes to fill, she seemed like she was in a rush. She blurted out, I have to go, and she ran out of the pharmacy. This was at about 4:30 p.m. Later, a witness would come forward and say they saw somebody matching the description of Carmen getting into a car near Jack's Drugs. But nobody in the short distance between Jack's Drugs and the Cologne home saw anything else suspicious. When Carmen didn't return home by 5 p.m., her mother got worried, and so she sent some of her uncles, Carmen's uncles, out to look for her. But by 7:30, when she still hadn't come home, Carmen's mother called the police and filed a missing persons report. And at that time, the police descended on the Bull's Head area, and between 40 police officers and a bunch of Carmen's family, they did a thorough search of the area, going door to door, just checking every place that they thought she could be hiding, and there was no sign of her. They wouldn't know until later that they were looking in the wrong place. At around 5:30 p.m., several motorists on a highway called 490 would see Carmen running away from a vehicle. The vehicle was going backwards in reverse, and Carmen was running away from the vehicle, waving her arms as if asking for help. But nobody did stop to help her. In this time, there was no cell phones, and so you couldn't just grab your phone and make a call to the police. But nobody made an attempt to pull over and see if she was okay. Nobody made an attempt to pull over and go to a payphone and call the police and let them know what they'd seen. Not until Carmen turned up, brutally murdered, would anybody come forward and say that they had seen her on the highway that day. A couple eyewitnesses that were interviewed said they didn't think there was anything weird about it. They said they thought she was just in a fight with her parents and running away, and her parents were trying to grab her. At this time, it was more likely that a child was running away from her parents than abducted, or some sort of foul play was going on. Nobody suspected that. Now, that is definitely something that would be your first go-to thought, that something's going on with this little girl, we need to help her. But then people just kind of thought it was like a family matter, let them handle it. This is a classic case of the psychological bystander effect. So a bystander effect is basically when a bunch of people see something, but they don't do anything about it because they assume somebody else will do something about it. This also has to do with a diffusion of responsibility. So I'm not the only people around. There's a lot of people on this highway right now. Surely somebody else will do what needs to be done. I can just go home. I'm running late. I got to pick my kids up. Dinner's going to be ready. This isn't my problem. On November 18th, 2 days after Carmen was taken, her body was found crumpled against a boulder on the side of a road in a little town called Churchville, about 15 miles away from Rochester, New York. Two teenage boys were riding their bikes along the side of the road when they saw what they thought was a broken doll laying in the bushes on the side of the road. Closer inspection revealed the body of Carmen Cologne. She was naked from the waist down. She only had on her shoes, her socks, and a sweater. Her autopsy revealed that she was beaten, raped, and manually strangled from the front. A couple of her uncles came to identify her body, and they said they could still see dried tears on her cheeks. The community was scared, confused, and outraged. So many people did not understand how all these drivers on 490 could drive past Carmen running away from her attacker and not do anything. Those who recall growing up in Rochester around that time recall a shift in their feeling of safety. Kids weren't really allowed to go play outside by themselves anymore. In a time when it was pretty common to leave your door unlocked and send your kid outside in the morning on his bike and he wouldn't be back until dinner time, that wasn't happening anymore. Months went by and there was no break in the case of Carmen Cologne's murder. But eventually enough time passed, almost a year and a half, where the people of Rochester started to relax. They thought it was just an isolated incident, maybe somebody traveling through their city. Surely nobody from their city could have committed such a heinous act. And people began to relax. But that sense of peace would be shattered in April of 1973 when another young girl was found beaten, raped, and murdered on the side of the road. Wanda was a streetwise, freckled redhead with beautiful blue eyes and a demeanor that showed maturity far beyond her 11 years. Her father died of a heart attack when she was 6, leaving Wanda's mother alone to care for two young girls, Wanda and her younger sister. They had to move from their childhood home into a small apartment on Avenue D in the city of Rochester, and Wanda's mother was really struggling to make it by, trying to care for two children on her husband's meager Social Security checks. Because of the stress and the financial demands, Wanda's mother Joyce turned to drinking. She became a regular at the local pubs, which were within walking distance of their Avenue D apartment. She would even bring Wanda and her little sister with her to the bar sometimes, just to make sure that they were okay. And, she didn't leave them alone, which was good, but I guess being at a bar is still not the best place for two young girls. Eventually, at one of these bars, she met a man, and I guess they got into a relationship, and he moved in with Wanda and the two girls. Wanda was described by her teachers as a hard worker in school. She had a good personality. She was pretty well liked by everybody. She missed a lot of school, which I assume had to do with her situation at home, but even missing 57 days of school that year, she was still coming home on April 2nd, 1973 with her best report card ever. So she was obviously probably really pumped, really excited to show her mom, just happy in general. You know, you leave school, you have a good report card in your hand, you're on your way home. It's just a good feeling when you're 11 years old. Personally, I used to rush home after school in order to get my report card out of the mailbox before my mother would get home and see it. So I don't remember that feeling that well. One of Wanda's teachers did say he could sense she had a strong sense of responsibility at home. Like she was tasked with a lot at home. She was kind of a little mother, you know, like a mini adult. She had this feeling that she was responsible for her younger sister. She had this feeling that she was responsible at times even for her mother, who was an alcoholic. So she had an aura of a young child who was wise beyond her years and was taking on more responsibility than somebody her age probably should have. When Wanda got home from school that afternoon, she was asked to go to the market. The pets needed dog food. Her baby sister, her new baby sister, because Wanda's mother and this bar guy she met, they'd had a baby too, so her new baby sister needed diapers, and they needed staples like bread and milk and things for dinner. So she was in the middle of coloring in her coloring book, and her mother basically said, you know, that'll be there when you get home. We need you to go to the market now and get this stuff. So Wanda put her crayons down, got her shoes on, and she walked out the door. She left the house to walk the short and familiar route to the market. The kids would take turns going to the market, Wanda and her younger sister. So she was familiar with going there, getting things for her family, and coming back. She actually met a couple friends on the way to the market, and she walked some of the ways to the store with them, but they ended up going to a different store, so they turned a different way, and she kept going up Conkey Avenue to the market. When she got there, there was actually a lot of things that she needed to get, and the person who was bagging up her groceries remembers that he put everything in one bag for her so she would have less to carry home, and that it was a big bag. It was like overflowing with things, and it was pretty heavy for a little girl. So she left the market with this bag of groceries, and a woman who used to babysit her was actually at a nearby pub where she could see the street from the pub. I guess bars and pubs are super popular in this neighborhood during this time, and she saw Wanda leave the market with this big bag of groceries, and she recalls seeing her walk away, and that there was nothing really suspicious about that. She just seemed to be struggling under the weight of the bag, and she'd have to stop and shift every so often or lean against a fence post and put the bag up in her arms to get a better grip of it. One moment she saw Wanda trying to get a better grip on this bag, and the next moment she was gone. When Wanda didn't make it home, and Wanda's mother knew how long it took usually to go to the market and get back, everybody got a little worried, especially because of the Carmen Cologne murder a year and a half before. So she sent Wanda's little sister to the store to find her. I don't understand this. Like, one of my daughters is missing, so let me send the other one out to go find her. Like, what is this woman doing? Go find your kid. What the heck? Or how about this? Like, go get your own groceries. This is insane to me, but it was a different time. So she sent Wanda's younger sister out to find her. The little sister and one of her neighborhood friends, they both walked to the deli in the store to see if Wanda had been there. And when the clerk told the girls that she had already been there and left, they walked back home and told Joyce that Wanda was nowhere to be found. So Joyce called the police around 7:47, almost over 2 hours since she had last seen her daughter. And around 8:15, they did a huge search and rescue effort in the neighborhood looking for Wanda. But of course, there was no sign of her. When the police were looking into her whereabouts, they were told of a story where 2 days prior to her disappearance, Wanda and a friend of hers were walking along some railroad tracks at 10 p.m. at night. And don't ask me what an 11-year-old girl is doing out at 10 p.m. at night. And this kind of explains to me why she was missing so much school, 57 days. I mean, she was probably exhausted, and nobody was there the next morning to say, hey, go to school. So she was clearly kind of parenting herself. Her and a friend are walking along these railroad tracks at 10 p.m. and a man started chasing them. and they started running away, and eventually, he just like dove off and hid in the bushes. It turned out this man was a known sex offender, and when the police asked Wanda's mother, Joyce, if she was aware of this incident, she admitted that she was. And obviously she probably felt horrible about that, knowing that her daughter had been chased after by a pedophile days before, and she still sent her out to go get groceries. But I think in those times, they didn't really think about it that way. They were more trusting. Everybody was more trusting. They didn't, I don't know. It was just a different time. The next morning was Wanda's little sister Rita's birthday. It was also the day that Wanda's family was notified that her body had been found dumped about 15 miles away from Rochester in a town called Webster. A New York State trooper was doing a basic patrol of the area of 104, and it was, kind of like a dull, rainy day. Everything was gray and brown. It's April, so it's just rainy and gross, and everything's brown because it hasn't gotten like green yet. It's still kind of gross from the winter, and it's raining all the time. So literally all you see in Rochester at this time is like gray and brown. But he spotted some, white sticking out to him in a hillside area. The white that he spotted was actually Wanda's bare legs. She was lying face down. She was still dressed in the blue and white checkered dress that she had worn to school the day before. Unlike Carmen, though, Wanda was strangled from behind, and she was strangled with a belt or something like a belt instead of manually with the attacker's hands. And even though she too had been brutally raped and assaulted, she was allowed to either get dressed before she was killed or her attacker redressed her himself. So Wanda was strangled manually from the front, which is a more personal type of murder. It's where you want to see the person's face and you want to have like a hands-on sort of experience when you're killing them. It suggests an anger or a connection of some kind. Also, she was left naked from the waist down, which also suggests kind of a personal vendetta, whereas Wanda was strangled in a more impersonal way, kind of just like, I have to get the deed done so this girl doesn't identify me, and then she was either redressed or allowed to redress. So it does suggest that the attacker had some sort of care for her modesty or for the state her body would be found in, whereas with Carmen, there was none of that care. During the autopsy, her stomach contents puzzled the police because it showed within 2 hours of her death she had eaten custard, a food which she wouldn't have been able to buy at the deli or market. And when she went to the deli market for her mother's groceries, she used her mother's credit. So basically back in those days, they would have a line of credit at the stores, and you would just give the name of the person, and they would mark it down and then give you a bill every month for your groceries. You didn't have to actually bring money with you. And when Wanda left that day, she didn't have any money on her, and there was no place really close by that she could have gotten the custard from. This suggested to the police that she had been fed before her death. So most likely she had been lured in by the promise of ice cream. And in order to kind of keep her quiet and calm, the murderer actually had to drive and get her ice cream so that she wouldn't be like, why aren't we getting ice cream, and freak out. The attacker had to gain the trust of these young girls in order to get away with driving them out away from their home to an unknown location or a further location away in order to carry out his plans and rape and murder them. Those who knew Wanda insisted she would never get into the car with a person she didn't know. But I look back on that day, April 2nd, 1973. It was rainy. She was wearing a dress, so she was probably cold and getting wet. She was carrying a really heavy bag of groceries, and her home wasn't a far walk from the deli, but maybe she just really wanted to get back to her coloring book. Maybe she just really wanted to get home where it was warm, and maybe she would have been more accepting of a ride from a stranger. Between Wanda and Carmen's death, the city went into lockdown again. School parking lots were packed in the morning and the afternoon, with parents dropping their kids off and picking them up from school, no longer wanting them to walk to school by themselves, which I don't blame them. Residents who lived in the area at the time say that you pretty much didn't see kids in the street at this time. They said occasionally you would see a boy child here or there, but there were no girl children left out. Parents were locking their daughters up tight. They didn't want them to become the next victim. of what was now coined the alphabet killer because of Carmen's initials CC and the fact that she was dropped in Churchville, and Wanda's initials WW and the fact that she was dropped in Webster. They started to see a pattern of the double initials plus the letter of the place that they were dropped in. 7 months later, another girl would go missing. 11-year-old Michelle Mienza was described as happy-go-lucky, friendly, shy, a little bit introverted, but such a nice girl. She was young for her age. She was unfortunately bullied at school because she was a little heavier and kind of awkward, not really outgoing, like I said, shy and introverted. So she preferred to hang out with younger children who accepted her for who she was and didn't bully her or make her feel bad about herself. And because of this, she was kind of a little bit more on the social level of somebody who was a couple years younger than her. She had 2 younger sisters and 2 older brothers, but she didn't live with her brothers because some years before, Michelle's mother and father had gotten divorced, and her older brothers lived with their father, and Michelle and her 2 younger sisters, they lived with her mother. Unlike Wanda and Carmen's parents, who kind of seemed to just let their kids do whatever, Michelle's mother, Carolyn, seemed much more protective. People who knew them said Carolyn would bring her 3 daughters with them everywhere. If she went to the laundromat, to the store, they were always with her. And in the morning, she would take baby Christine, put her in a stroller, and walk her 2 older daughters to school. And she would also pick them up from school in the afternoon. And this gave Michelle a lot of grief at school as well. People bullied her and called her a baby. Oh, you need your mommy to walk you to school. And it was just normal bullying, but it's so crazy to me that the one girl in the situation whose mother actually cares to walk her to school and make sure she's safe, she gets teased and tormented from it by her peers. It's horrible. On November 26th of 1973, Carolyn walked to school in the afternoon, as usual, to pick up her 2 daughters, but only 8-year-old Marie was there to be picked up, and the school informed her that Michelle had decided to stay after. What they didn't tell her at that time was Michelle had been forced to stay after because she had been being bullied and victimized on the playground by another girl, and both of the girls had been pulled in for the incident and told they were staying after for detention, which is clearly very unfair because Michelle was the one being victimized. Michelle was the one being bullied, but yet she was forced to stay after school for this. At that point, Carolyn made a decision that I'm sure haunted her for the rest of her life. She said, well, I'm going to bring these 2 girls home, and Michelle will be fine to walk home. It's a short walk. She's done it before. So she told the school to just let Michelle know that when she was done with whatever she was doing after school, to come on home. At 3:15, Michelle left the school, I'm sure not in the best spirits. She'd had a tough day. She was being bullied constantly at school. She was probably feeling pretty bad about herself. The next day was her birthday, so she should have been feeling happy. She should have been feeling like a young girl on the eve of her 11th birthday, excited for what was to come, excited for a party or presents or to hang out with her friends. But instead, I'm sure she left school that day feeling pretty, down in the dumps. Even though she'd had the day from hell, Michelle was a good daughter and a good person at her heart, and she didn't go straight home. She actually turned right onto Ackerman, heading toward Goodman Plaza, where her mother had left her purse at the Super Saver store there the past Saturday. So she wanted to go get her mother's purse and bring it home for her because her mother had been stressed out about losing her purse. Michelle's uncle on her father's side, he owned a gas station at the intersection of Melville and Webster Avenue, and he would often see Carolyn and her daughters walking home in the afternoon from school. And that afternoon, he only saw Carolyn walk by with Marie and Christine, so he assumed he would be seeing Michelle come by later, and he never saw her. When Michelle hadn't made it home by 5 p.m., her mother got understandably worried. She seemed to understand that little girls need to be protected, especially in that time and place, and she called the police immediately. She let the police know that she didn't think there was anything going on at home or at school that would cause Michelle to run away, and that Michelle also knew not to get into the car with strangers. She did have, an element of the stranger danger. I'm sure her mother coached her well, so she didn't think that she would willingly go with anybody. Once again, a massive search would begin for this little girl, centered mainly around the neighborhood that she was from and disappeared from. There are reports that Michelle's mother knew when Michelle didn't come home that night that she had become a victim of foul play. She could sense it and feel it. She actually had a mental breakdown and she had to be hospitalized and medicated because she was just so upset. I'm sure she blamed herself, as any parent would. Any good parent would blame themselves, and I'm sure she did. And I'm sure she lived with that, or still does live with it. 2 days after Michelle was last seen, her body was found once again dumped on the side of the road in a town called Macedon, about 24 miles from the city of Rochester. She was bruised, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Like Wanda and unlike Carmen, her body was fully clothed, and she had been strangled from behind with some sort of tool instead of from the front manually. Her body was positioned haphazardly on its side, as if it had been just tossed from a moving car. At this time, using DNA to solve crimes was over a decade away, but they did pull a fingerprint from her boot and some prints from her coat. And they also found some white cat hairs on her clothes, which was interesting to the police because they also found white cat hair on the clothes of Wanda, but not Carmen. They were also able to lift a single print from her neck using a new technique that used salt and iodine. So they had prints from her coat and boots and from her neck. There were a lot of reported sightings of Michelle, but the few that stand out to me as being connected and that had actually panned out was a woman saw Michelle and a man at a hamburger place in Penfield. The girl who looked like Michelle was sitting in the vehicle, and the man walked to the hamburger place to get some food. He had dirty hands, and once he got the bag of food, he walked back to the car, and then they were gone. When Michelle's autopsy was done, it did show that within the hours leading up to her death, she had had a hamburger. I wonder if Michelle told her attacker, when he was being conversational and nice to her, that it was her birthday the next day. Maybe he felt bad knowing what he was going to do. Maybe he wanted to give her some sort of last birthday meal. It's horrible to consider that on Michelle's 11th birthday, she was most likely being assaulted, abused, raped, and strangled to death. Another eyewitness says he saw a car pulled over on the side of the road, and he thought that the car had a flat tire, so he stopped to help. And the man who was in the car did not want his help. He was also trying to block a young girl that he had with him who matched Michelle's description. And when the motorist stopped to help, the guy got really upset and agitated and kind of tried to block his license plate, and just freaked out and didn't want any help. This tip was significant because her body would be found less than a mile away from where this happened. Michelle was a people pleaser. She desperately wanted to be liked. She wasn't accepted by her peers in school. She didn't have, a father around really to give her that acceptance from a male figure that little girls need. And she was shy and introverted, and she was probably feeling pretty lonely, not having many friends at school, not really, being accepted by anybody. She was an awkward kind of kid, and she probably would have given the time of day to anybody who would give her attention, give her a compliment, make her feel special, make her feel heard. So I don't think it took much for this person to get Michelle to come with him. I think Michelle was looking for acceptance and love and a friend anywhere she could find it. I mean, she had no problem hanging out with children that were younger than her just to have a group of people to be with. So I don't think she would have a problem with being friends with somebody who was older than her if that person offered her a sense of acceptance. So it is theorized that the murder of Carmen Cologne and the murders of Wanda and Michelle were done by a different person because of the different methods of strangulation, because of the different ways the bodies were found, and because of the fact that Carmen didn't have any food in her stomach, but Wanda and Michelle did. So it was thought that Carmen was taken by somebody she knew and that she trusted because they didn't need to bribe her with food or ice cream or hamburgers, and she just kind of got into their car sort of willingly. And that is why her uncle, Miguel Cologne, her sort of stepfather, the man who had moved in with her mother after her father abandoned them, he was a big-time suspect. The attack on Carmen, once again, like I already said, it felt personal. The killer wanted to see her face when he was strangling her. He wanted to use his own hands, more of a personal touch. And it seemed that her body was left in worse shape, that she had been beaten a little bit more, that she had been kind of abused. And the fact that she was left sort of half naked suggests that the person who killed her kind of had a reason to embarrass her or humiliate her or make her feel bad. When Carmen was running away from the car in the expressway, many people theorized that it was somebody she knew, because why else would this person take the risk of chasing her in such a public manner if she couldn't identify him? Why would an attacker who had taken a girl make such a big and public display of chasing after her after she had allegedly, or what we think happened is that she got away and the person chased her? But why would he do that if she couldn't really identify him? It's theorized that she knew who her attacker was, and that's why he had to get her back in that car, because if she got away, she could point the finger at him. The car seen chasing Carmen was reportedly identical to the car that Miguel Cologne had just purchased. And even though it was a new car, after Carmen went missing, the car was thoroughly cleaned inside. But her hair and her doll were found in that vehicle, which I guess isn't crazy. Like I said, he was kind of like her foster stepfather. He lived in her mother's house. I'm sure she would have been in his car before, but it's still kind of strange. What is really strange though is when the police went to question him about his involvement, he like freaked out and fled. He went to Syracuse, which is further towards New York City from Rochester, and when they followed him to Syracuse, he then again fled to Spanish Harlem in New York City, and from there to Puerto Rico. A man living in New York City who was a friend of Miguel's at the time, he said Miguel came to him after Carmen had been found to be murdered, and he said, "I need to get out of here, I need to get to Puerto Rico, I've done something bad in Rochester." The police chased him all the way to Puerto Rico, and they were there for 7 days trying to find him. And for the entire 7 days that they were there, Miguel hid in the jungle, like literally the jungle. It was the jungle. I don't know any other way to say it. Like, I'm not talking about, a forest. I'm not talking about, like a cabin in the woods. I'm saying like straight up jungle, no shelter, no cable, no electricity, no running water. He was so keen to avoid these investigators while he was in Puerto Rico. For the entire 6 to 7 days they were there, he stayed in this jungle. He eventually did return to New York, and he was questioned about Carmen's death, but I don't think anything ever came of it, which is crazy to me because you clearly thought this guy was involved. That's why you went to Puerto Rico, and he clearly had something to hide because he ran so far, but nothing ever came of it. In 1991, Miguel Cologne tried to kill his wife, Carmen's mother, and when the police showed up, he said to them, "Shoot me, just kill me," and they didn't, so he ended up just taking his own gun and killing himself. When the family was questioned after his death about whether he was involved in Carmen's death, they all still to this day insist that he was not, but you be the judge of that. James Barber was also thought to be involved in Carmen's murder. He was a cook in the Bull's Head area where Carmen lived. He worked at a local restaurant where they utilized like a punch clock system where you would have a time card and you would put it inside the punch clock and it would stamp it, the time you came in and the time you left. The day that Carmen went missing, he didn't punch in with the clock. He wrote in his time manually. When Carmen was discovered to be missing and murdered, James Barber took off. He didn't take anything from his apartment. He didn't give his job notice. He just left. And after this suspicious behavior, they looked into his past and found that he was wanted in the state of Ohio for sodomizing a 15-year-old girl. They obviously searched for him to question him, but once they did find him, it was in Ohio in a graveyard because he had died. Another person thought to be involved in the murders of Wanda and Michelle, possibly Carmen, is a firefighter named Dennis Termini. Termini was a 25-year-old fighter who had abducted or tried to abduct a 16-year-old girl on New Year's Day. She was walking out of a hotel and he tried to grab her, but she screamed and made such a big scene that he ran away to find his next victim, which he did shortly after that. It was an 18-year-old girl who was walking away from him. He grabbed her from behind, held a gun to her head, and dragged her into an empty garage where he then told her to get undressed. But fortunately, a neighbor who saw the abduction go down called the police, and the police showed up at the garage, and Dennis fled once again. He found a parked car on a street, climbed into the car, locked the car from the inside, and when the police tracked him there through his footprints in the freshly fallen snow, he basically just took a gun and he killed himself. Dennis was thought to be involved because he was close to all three of the murders in all three of the areas. He kept his firefighting outfit or costume or uniform in his car, so he would always have it close to him, and a lot of people did think that the person who took the girls was somebody who might have been dressed in uniform, somebody who might have seemed trustworthy from the get-go without even having to know them. He was called the garage rapist, and it soon came out that he was responsible for at least 14 rapes between 1971 and 1973. It was clearly not lost on detectives that this was the same space and time that the 3 girls had gone missing and been raped and murdered. The most incriminating piece of evidence against Dennis Termini for these murders was the white cat hair found in his car and on his clothes. None of the girls owned white cats, but 2 of them had white cat hair on their clothes, the same white cat hair that was on Dennis Termini's clothes and in his car. But his MO didn't match. He usually went after older women between 16 and 18 years old, and he never killed his victims. He always left them alive. Typically, a serial killer or a serial rapist, their MOs aren't going to change. They don't go from younger to older. They don't go from not killing to killing. They have a standard MO that they follow, especially when it comes to the age and sort of type that they go after. In 2007, the Sheriff's Department obtained a warrant to exhume Dennis Termini, who was already dead and buried, obviously. Years before, they had found DNA in the underwear of Wanda. So they found semen, basically, in her underwear. I suppose they also had found some at Carmen and Michelle's crime scene, but over the years, those samples had gotten lost, which is kind of troublesome for me. Like, where did they go? What happened to them? But anyways, his DNA was compared against the semen sample they found in Wanda's underwear, and he was ruled out as being a suspect in at least her murder because the DNA didn't match. 2 of the more kind of crazy theories, I think, that really need a little bit to kind of reach and be connected are Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler, did. He was a Rochester native, as was his cousin, and they both moved to LA in order to, I don't know, get out of Rochester. I don't blame them. I live here, and it's not really that much fun. But Kenneth Bianchi, along with his cousin, raped, tortured, and murdered 10 women in LA. The victims were strangled, and they were left on a hillside overlooking the city, and that's why he was given the name the Hillside Strangler. Bianchi and his cousin tricked these women into coming with them willingly by pretending to be police officers. He's a very famous, I guess, serial killer, but he was from Rochester, and he lived in Rochester until he was 26, so he was there during the time of the murders of Carmen, Wanda, and Michelle. He actually didn't leave until 1975, which is right around the time that the murders stopped. During his time in Rochester, he did a couple odd jobs. He was an ambulance driver, and he was also an ice cream man, so he would have had a lot of close contact with children. And I don't know if it's connected, but Wanda was found with custard ice cream in her stomach contents after she was killed. The first time this was ever connected, that Kenneth Bianchi might be connected with these alphabet murders, was a 1981 news article that said the method of strangulation and the way the bodies were dumped, like in open space outside, was very similar to Kenneth Bianchi's. And he also had a blood type that the police were looking for that was very rare. Only 20% of the men share this blood profile. Bianchi was not happy to be connected or associated with these murders. I suppose even serial killers have their moral high ground or a line they won't cross. And it is said if you go to jail for raping or murdering a child that they will eat you up, because even criminals don't like crimes against children. And Kenneth Bianchi did not want to have anything to do with this crime. He said he was not involved, absolutely wasn't him. And at this point, he was facing 2 life sentences for all his murders he committed in California, so he didn't really have any goal or aim to reach by denying these murders if he had been a part of them. He did willingly give his wrist prints and palm prints and his DNA. He really wanted to be cleared from this murder, I guess. Based on the DNA, Bianchi, just like Termini, was eliminated from at least Wanda's murder because the DNA did not match that found on her body. And last but not least, a little bit of a far-reaching theory is that Joe Nassau did it. In April 2010, Joe Nassau, or Crazy Joe, as his friends called him, he was actually arrested for committing many murders in the California area. He is convicted of killing at least 4 women and suspected of killing many more. And he is actually a Rochester native and grew up and lived in Rochester for some time. So we have a really strong history of serial killers. There's more. I won't get into it now, but there's a lot of serial killers, crazy people born in Rochester. The reasons he was suspected in the case was because of the double initials of women he murdered in California. His California victims were Roxanne Rogash, Pamela Parsons, Tracy Tafoya, and Carmen Cologne. So not only did a lot of his victims share twin initials, but one of his victims was the exact same name as one of the girls who died in Rochester. The women were all raped and strangled, similar to the alphabet murders in Rochester, but like Termini and like Bianchi, his DNA did not match to the DNA found in Wanda's underwear. Once again, it's also not common for a predator like this to change his MO. He's not going to be raping and killing young girls in 1973 and then in, later 80s, 90s, 2000s graduate to older women. It's just these kinds of perverts and predators, they like what they like, and that doesn't change for them. So those are the theories. My personal opinion is that Carmen's uncle, Miguel, he was responsible for her death. Possibly somebody else killed the other two girls, maybe a copycat, maybe even Miguel, who was trying to get the heat off of him so it didn't look like there was a personal connection to Carmen. Maybe he actually went so far as to kill two more girls to make it seem like there was a serial killer out there instead of, just a personal vendetta against Carmen. Maybe he was sexually abusing her for most of her childhood, and now she was getting to the age where she was going to tell, so he couldn't let that happen. But the other girls were strangled much less personally, and they were also given a little bit more respect in their bodies when they were dumped. The length of time between Carmen's murder and the other two would also suggest a different suspect. There was a big gap, over a year of time, between when Carmen was killed and when Wanda was killed, but then not so big of a gap between Wanda and Michelle. I could not really tell you who I think is responsible for Wanda and Michelle's murders. It could have been somebody they knew. It could have been somebody that stalked them and, did go after them for their twin initials, purposely left them in areas that started with the same letter just to kind of be, coy or funny. A lot of people think the twin initial thing is coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences, especially considering they were dropped and dumped in towns with the same first letter. It just seems way too much of a coincidence for that to happen to 3 girls. That's just my opinion. We may never know what happened to these girls. They were all young, they were all innocent, they all had their whole lives ahead of them, and they were all kind of coming from situations where their home life maybe wasn't the best, or they weren't getting enough attention, or there was something lacking, a male presence at home typically, a nurturing environment. I think any of these girls would have been receptive to a kind word or a friendly smile or the offering of an ice cream or a hamburger. I think any of these girls would have been receptive to making a new friend. I will leave you with one final strange theory that I heard. These girls were thought to be picked up by the letters in their names. But maybe they were picked up because of the initialism that their names put together made. Carmen, Wanda, Michelle, CWM. Come with me. The words their attacker would have said to them before changing their lives forever. Thank you guys so much for being here with me today. I'm sorry if there was a lot of jump cuts because my little daughter, she's been sick and she's stuffed up, so she wakes up a lot when she's sleeping and I have to go in and kind of soothe her. I am so sorry if the sound is not right. If the sound is not right, guys, I'm going to fix it by the next video. I played with it for like 45 minutes this morning and I could not figure it out. So either I have to do some serious Googling and become an audio-visual genius overnight, or I just need to give it to somebody who can help me, who knows more than I do. So either way, I will get it fixed. If it's not fixed in this video, I'll get it fixed by next video. If it is fixed in this video, I'm a genius. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please like, subscribe, and comment. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think happened to these girls, and let me know if you've heard of this case before, because there was like this B-list kind of movie made called The Alphabet Murders or The Alphabet Killer or something. It wasn't a good movie, but there was a movie made about it. So let me know if you've heard about this case, because it does happen in my hometown, which is kind of interesting to me. I hope everybody's having a great day. I hope you enjoyed Mystery Monday. I'll be posting another true crime video this coming week. And then, of course, every Monday, you will have a Mystery Monday. Thank you guys so much for being here with me. Stay kind and stay beautiful, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Perfect timing. Look who just woke up, little sicky girl. Say hi. Hi. Can you say hi to everyone? Hi. This is Bella. She does not feel good today, but we are going to spend our day in bed watching Trolls. Are we going to watch Trolls? Are we going to watch Trolls today? Just take it easy and relax. So, okay, you want to get some breakfast? Breakfast? You want scrambled eggs? No? What do you want? Do you want ice cream? Ice cream? Do you want a popsicle? Okay, say bye. Say bye. We're gonna go watch Trolls and sit in bed all day. Say bye to everybody. Say bye. Oh, are you blowing a kiss? Okay, I'm gonna go take care of this little one. Everybody, thank you for being here. Like the video if you liked it. Comment if you have an idea of what happened to these girls. Comment if you've heard about this case, because I know there was some like B-list movie made about it called like The Alphabet Killers or The Alphabet Murders or something like that, but I don't know if anybody ever really watched it. And give this a thumbs up if you liked it. Did I say that already? Yeah. Go ahead and go ahead and subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. And she's playing with Rosie. Go ahead and subscribe if you aren't already subscribed, and I will see you guys next time. Stay kind and stay beautiful. Mwah. Bye. Are you trying to get Rosie? Are you gonna feed Rosie your? Are you feeding Rosie your pretzel? Rosie wants your pretzel? Does Rosie want your pretzel?
Yeah, I'm waking up to ash and